imagine for a second that you and your coworkers decide to go on strike.
Right, you're holding the line for fair pay.
Exactly. You have a legally binding national union agreement. But instead of actually negotiating with you, the company you work for just completely bypasses you. They import an entirely different workforce from another country, stick them on a barge off the coast so you can't even talk to them, and bus them in every single day on way lower wages.
I mean, it sounds like a dystopian movie plot.
It does, but that actually happened right here in the UK. And the craziest part, the company didn't even break the law to do it. They just used like this international trade loophole to sidestep the local union altogether.
Which is just, well, it's a perfect illustration of how power actually operates when local labor disputes crash into global capital.
Right.
Because when the rules of the game are written by international corporate interests, national borders, and, local union badges, they suddenly mean very little.
And that exact collision between the working class and this massive global economic machine, that is the sole focus of our deep dive today. We're exploring a very specific, fiercely argued political perspective on the current state of the UK and the wider world economy.
Yeah, it's a fascinating lens to look through.
It really is. So to do this, we are unpacking the July 2026 issue of The Socialist, which is the weekly newspaper of the Socialist Party in the UK. And I just want to state very clearly, right up front to everyone listening, we are not endorsing the viewpoints of this publication.
No, not at all.
Right, and we aren't here to debate their ethics either. Our mission today is just impartial exploration. We want to see how this specific socialist movement diagnoses the political moment we're in, how they connect the dots between our daily struggles, and what they believe is the only viable solution.
And to really understand their worldview, you have to grasp their core diagnosis, right? Which they call the crisis of capitalism.
The crisis of capitalism. Okay.
Yeah. The source material argues that we are living under an economic system that is fundamentally wired to prioritize profit over human need, always. So they don't look at things like poverty or failing public services or global instability and say, oh, these are accidents or glitches in the system.
Right, like it's a mistake.
Exactly. They view those things as the system working exactly as it was designed to work. It's extracting wealth from the working class to protect the capital of the elite. And today, we're going to look at how they apply that specific lens to the recent upheaval in the UK government, dangerous workplace conditions, the fallout of Brexit, and their big push for a new international workers' party.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the most immediate application of this lens is pointed right at the top of British politics. I mean, it is the biggest news in the country right now. Keir Starmer has been forced out as Prime Minister, and Andy Burnham has stepped in.
Yep, a massive shakeup.
And if you turn on mainstream news, the narrative is very much, this is a major reset for the Labour Party. It's a totally fresh start. But the publication we're looking at reads this transition in a completely different way, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. They see it as a totally superficial rebranding of the exact same machinery.
Yeah.
I mean, the publication draws this really sharp, kind of brutal contrast between Starmer's exit and the everyday reality of working class life.
Because Starmer said he was resigning to focus on his family, right?
Right. He literally said he wanted to focus on the most important job, which is being the best dad he can. And the source immediately takes that sentiment and juxtaposes it with the reality that right now, over 1 million families are reliant on food banks.
Wow.
And 150,000 children are living in emergency accommodation. They point out the bitter irony that 7 out of 10 fathers in the UK can't even afford to take 2 weeks of statutory paternity leave.
So the implication there is that, focusing on your family like that is essentially a luxury that's only afforded to the political elite, while the actual working class is just economically trapped.
Exactly.
But I look at Andy Burnham stepping into the role, and I mean, he campaigned heavily on change. He's been publicly calling for an end to 40 years of neoliberalism. He seems to be signaling a real shift away from those corporate-friendly policies. So why is this publication so entirely dismissive of his potential to actually fix things?
What's fascinating here is that they argue personal rhetoric is just totally powerless against structural financial pressure. Like, Burnham is already completely hemmed in by the demands of the capitalist class.
How so?
Well, they highlight the Financial Times, which they essentially view as the direct mouthpiece of British capitalism, and the FT is already dictating terms to Burnham. They're demanding he make, quote, tough choices, rein in welfare, and specifically break the triple lock on state pensions.
Okay, let's just clarify that triple lock for anyone who might be unfamiliar. That's the UK government policy that guarantees the state pension will go up every year by whatever is highest, right? like inflation, average wage growth, or 2.5%.
Right. It's a crucial safety net for retirees.
So the financial sector is actively demanding he cut that safety net just to save the state money.
Precisely. And the source emphasizes that Burnham is capitulating to this pressure before he even officially gets started.
Right.
Just look at how he's taking power.
There wasn't even a broader labor leadership contest.
Exactly. He is basically being crowned prime minister with the heavy backing of the party's pro-market wing, people like Rachel Reeves and Yvette Cooper. And the publication also points straight at his immediate staff appointments, like he made James Purnell his chief of staff.
Which the source labels an ultra-Blairite, meaning, he belongs to that ideological wing of the party established by Tony Blair back in the 90s, the wing that fully embraced free market economics and privatization and, light touch regulation.
Right. And if that wasn't clear enough for people, Burnham also appointed Jim O'Neill from Goldman Sachs as an economic advisor.
Wow. Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. So from the socialist perspective here, you just cannot claim to be ending 40 years of neoliberalism when your inner circle is made up entirely of investment bankers and the original architects of privatization. They argue Burnham is structurally boxed in. He has to govern in the interests of the financial elite.
It's like they view this as rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. The captain changed, but the ship is still heading for the iceberg of austerity. And if the political leadership at the very top is functionally captured by those corporate interests, the source argues the consequences flow downstream right onto the shop floor.
Oh, absolutely. They pivot straight from Westminster to the visceral reality of working in the UK right now.
Yeah, they specifically highlight these recent heat waves we've been having. Temperatures have been hitting the top 30s, and there's currently no legal maximum working temperature in the UK.
Which is wild to think of.
Right. The law just says the temperature have to be reasonable, which is incredibly vague. So the publication is reporting on catering staff down in Devon, school support staff in Bristol, and London bus drivers who are literally having to take matters into their own hands. They're using Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act, 1996.
And Section 44 is a really crucial legal mechanism for workers. It essentially functions as a legal shield. It gives you the right to refuse to work or just leave the premises if you believe you are in serious and imminent danger.
You can't be fired for it.
Right, you're protected from disciplinary action.
It is so jarring to think about a school or a public bus essentially becoming a literal danger zone just because of the weather. We're talking about workers having to threaten wildcat strikes, these unofficial sudden walkouts, just to be allowed to take off a heavy apron in a boiling kitchen or to shut down a classroom that feels like an oven.
And the source connects this directly back to the economic model. Like on the London buses, they argue that private operators are deliberately skimping on installing proper air conditioning because doing so would cut into their profit margins.
Profits over people, again.
Exactly. But honestly, the source's most devastating critique of this whole economic model comes when they analyze the collapse of the healthcare system.
Yeah, they dive into the Donna Ockenden review of Nottingham's maternity services, and I gotta say, it is a genuinely harrowing read. The review details just catastrophic outcomes for over 2,500 families between 2010 and 2025.
And the mechanical failure driving all of this is chronic understaffing. The review found that the department was operating short of 13 consultants and 73 midwives.
That's a massive shortfall.
It is. Staff were testifying to working these grueling 12-hour shifts without a single break, trying to care for multiple women in labor simultaneously with zero support. And the publication heavily emphasizes one specific finding from all these testimonies. There was a prevailing culture that prioritized finance over patient safety.
And it extends way beyond just maternity, too. The source notes that almost 3,000 patients a day are now receiving care in hospital corridors or even in supply cupboards, which is just horrific. But I want to connect the dots here because how does the publication take a specific localized tragedy like the Nottingham maternity ward and blame that on this global crisis of capitalism? It feels like a massive leap to go from a failing local hospital to macroeconomic theory.
Well, that is the central pillar of their entire argument. They don't view the corridor care or the understaffed wards as isolated administrative mistakes. They argue these are deliberate, mathematically predictable features of capitalism. They trace this chronic underfunding of the NHS directly back to the 2008 global financial crash.
Oh, the bank bailouts. I
Exactly.
see.
When the global banking system collapsed because of reckless financial speculation, governments around the world, including ours, used vast amounts of public wealth to bail out private banks.
Right.
And to balance the books afterward, they implemented severe austerity measures, slashing budgets for public services, freezing wages, cutting healthcare funding.
So austerity isn't just a political buzzword for them.
No, they view it as a mechanical transfer of wealth. The state drained money from public hospitals to save private banks. So when a hospital prioritizes finance over a newborn baby's safety, the system isn't glitching. It's prioritizing capital over human life, which is exactly how the post-2008 economic settlement was designed to function.
Man, that sets up a terrifying dynamic for the average worker. Because if the government is captured by financial interests and your daily conditions in hospitals or schools or buses are literally becoming dangerous, where do you even turn? The source argues that your only remaining defense mechanism is collective action.
Right, which brings us to the front lines of the trade union movement. Because when the political apparatus abandons you, you turn to the people working next to you. The publication covers the 20th National Shop Stewards Network Conference down in London.
Yeah, that brought together over 200 trade union delegates from all sorts of sectors: teachers, postal workers, bus drivers, and importantly, the Birmingham bin workers who have been locked in a strike for 18 months.
And the major strategic push at this conference was all about coordination. They want to unite these strikes across different industries, rather than letting isolated groups of workers fight these exhausting localized battles one by one.
Which makes logical sense, right? A united front across the whole economy gives you significantly more leverage.
It does. But here's where it gets really interesting, because the publication reveals a massive structural flaw within the unions themselves. They highlight this intense internal bureaucratic infighting. The Trades Union Congress, or TUC, which is the umbrella body for most unions, is actively threatening disciplinary action against the National Education Union.
The NEU. And the reason for this threat is just fascinating. The NEU has been out there actively organizing and recruiting school support staff, so teaching assistants, caretakers, administrative workers. But three other major unions, Unison, Unite, and the GMB, complained to the TUC, basically claiming the NEU was stepping on their turf. It just seems deeply contradictory. If your core socialist philosophy is workers of the world unite, why are the biggest unions in the country threatening each other over who gets to hold the paperwork for teaching assistants?
It's basically like trying to fight a fire in an apartment building, but the firefighters are out front arguing over who has the proper permit to hold the hose while the roof is caving in.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. The publication uses this conflict to expose this huge tension between the union bureaucracy at the top and the rank-and-file workers on the ground.
Because the leadership is obsessed with jurisdictional rules.
Exactly. They're treating workers like market share. But the source argues this top-down bureaucracy creates catastrophic division on the shop floor. They quote a delegate who warns that if the NEU is banned from collectively bargaining for its 65,000 support staff members, it could effectively create 65,000 strikebreakers.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of that.
Right. Think about the mechanics of a strike in a school. If the teachers walk out, but the support staff in the exact same building are told by a different union boss that they aren't allowed to join the picket line, the strike's power is instantly crippled. The school just stays open.
So the grassroots perspective championed by the publication demands maximum unity on the picket line, regardless of what specific union badge is pinned to your jacket.
Exactly. Because management certainly doesn't care what union you belong to when they freeze your pay. Workers can't afford to let bureaucratic lines divide them.
But, unity on the local picket line is really only half the battle, because the capital they're fighting isn't restricted by local borders, it moves globally.
Yeah.
And that brings us to, arguably, the most contentious political topic in modern British history, which the source addresses head-on.
The EU.
Yeah, we're recording this in 2026, which marks exactly 10 years since the UK voted to leave the European Union.
A full decade of Brexit.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate test case for whether changing trade borders could actually improve the lives of the working class.
Because the foundational promise of those prominent Leave campaigns was that breaking away from EU regulations would empower British workers, cut red tape, and boost the national economy. According to the source material, did any of that actually materialize?
Not at all. The publication notes that the UK economy is estimated to be 6 to 8% smaller than it would have been if we'd stayed. And they point out the sheer administrative disaster for smaller enterprises. Roughly 20,000 small businesses just stopped trading with the EU entirely because the new customs paperwork was just too expensive and complex.
So the Leave Project failed the working class. But, and this is a crucial pivot, the publication argues that remaining in the EU would not have saved the working class either.
Right, and this is where the socialist critique of the EU diverges completely from the nationalist right-wing critique. The publication does not view the EU as this progressive international brotherhood of nations. They analyze the EU treaties and structures and conclude it is essentially a bosses club.
A boss's club.
Yeah, it's a massive legal framework designed primarily to guarantee the free movement of capital and to prioritize corporate market access over national trade union protections.
Which brings us right back to the scenario we discussed at the very start of the deep dive. The source uses a very specific historical example to prove how the EU framework mechanically undercuts workers. The 2009 Lindsey oil refinery strike.
It perfectly illustrates the mechanism. You had 1,000 UK construction workers at this refinery. Their pay and working conditions were protected under a really hard-won national union agreement, but the management wanted to cut costs. So they utilized a specific piece of European legislation called the Posted Workers Directive.
Remind me how that directive actually functions in practice.
So it allows a company to bring in workers from one EU member state to work in another. But critically, it allows the employer to pay them based on the minimum standards of their home country, not the host country.
Wow.
Yeah, it basically acts as a legal loophole to completely bypass local union agreements. So the refinery bosses used this directive to hire Italian and Portuguese workers on vastly inferior terms, house them on a barge in Grimsby Dock to keep them physically isolated from the local workforce, and just bust them in.
It's so insidious. And, the nationalist political response at the time was super xenophobic. Politicians were shouting British jobs for British workers and calling for tighter borders. But the socialist trade union solution documented in the source was radically different.
Completely different. The workers on strike recognized that the migrant workers on the barge weren't the enemy. They were just being exploited by the exact same boss. So the strike committee translated their leaflets into Italian and Portuguese, bypassed the security, and appealed directly to the migrant workers to join the union.
That is incredible. They effectively built an international coalition right there on a local dock.
Exactly. They fought the bosses together, and the strike ended with the union protections being legally extended to all the workers, regardless of their nationality.
Which is such a profound distillation of their philosophy. The enemy isn't the migrant worker crossing the border, it's the multinational corporation exploiting the border. But, if the conservative Leave politicians pushing austerity are the enemy, and the Labor Remain politicians defending corporate EU treaties are also the enemy, how do they justify engaging in national politics at all?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source argues that tangible improvements in living conditions never come from membership in capitalist trading blocs or from nationalist isolation. I point out a hard statistic. The only real wage improvements in recent years were forced by the massive 3.6 million strike days taken during the 2022 to 2023 strike wave.
When nurses and railway staff and teachers actually coordinated their power and stopped working.
Right, they forced the government to act. The publication views the 2016 Brexit vote as a misdirected, angry backlash against austerity. The working class wanted to punish the establishment, but they were given a false choice. The underlying argument here is that workers only win when they exercise power entirely independent of both the nationalist right and the corporate center.
So, what does this all mean? That naturally leads us to the ultimate conclusion presented in the source. If the Labour Party is structurally captured by finance, and international institutions like the EU are fundamentally designed to protect capital, the publication argues there's only one viable path forward. The working class has to build an entirely new, mass political party from the ground up.
It is a demand for a total political reset, and they frame it as an absolute emergency. The publication argues that if a genuine left-wing workers' party isn't built immediately, right-wing populist groups like Nigel Farage's Reform UK are just going to successfully exploit the very legitimate anger of working-class communities who have watched their towns decay over the last 40 years.
And the driving engine for this proposed new party is the youth. The source highlights this deeply concerning demographic reality. 13% of young people in the UK are currently classified as NEET.
Right, not in education, employment, or training.
Yes, and that isn't just an acronym. It represents a massive structural failure of the economy. It's a whole generation effectively locked out of meaningful participation. The publication fiercely criticizes the new Labor government's proposed solution, which involves introducing unpaid work placement.
Yeah, the source views that not as an opportunity, but as just another mechanism to exploit desperate young people for free labor to boost corporate margins.
To combat this, the source points to international mobilization happening right now. They talk about a group called Socialist students attending a youth anti-war assembly in Cologne, Germany. And this wasn't just a local meeting. It brought together 12 different organizations from 8 European countries.
And they agreed to coordinate a Europe-wide youth strike on November 20th under the banner, "Fight for our futures, not their wars."
I read about that planned strike, and I have to push back a little here. Is this roadmap realistic? Building a brand new mass political party capable of winning elections in the UK while simultaneously coordinating international youth strikes across Europe. I mean, it sounds impossibly ambitious. Does the source provide a mechanical reason for why this is the only option, rather than just utopian hope?
They argue it is absolutely not utopian, it's a structural necessity. They root their historical optimism in events like the 1926 general strike, proving that mass coordination is possible. But their main argument is mathematical. Capitalism operates globally.
Right. Capital doesn't respect borders.
Exactly. The source points to a current contradiction. The EU is actively lifting debt restrictions for member states so they can massively increase military expenditure, while simultaneously demanding those same states impose strict austerity on public services to balance the books. So if the economic system you're fighting is globally coordinated, moving money instantly, utilizing directives to undercut wages, funding wars while defunding hospitals, then a fight back restricted to a single town or a single union or even a single country is mathematically doomed to fail. The working class movement inherently has to be an organized international political force to match the global reach of capital.
It is such a sweeping, comprehensive diagnosis of the modern world. We have covered a massive amount of ground today exploring the perspective laid out in this issue of The Socialist. We started by looking at the political transition from Keir Starmer to Andy Burnham, which the source views not as a reset, but as a continuation of a government captured by financial interests.
Right.
We traced how those macroeconomic priorities physically manifest on the ground, leaving workers utilizing legal loopholes just to survive extreme heat, and tracing the horrific collapse of maternity wards directly back to the austerity imposed after the 2008 bank bailouts.
And we examine the trade union movement as the primary line of defense, but also unpack the structural flaws where union bureaucracies prioritize turf wars over grassroots unity, risking the creation of thousands of strikebreakers.
We looked back at a decade of Brexit, unpacking how mechanisms like the Posted Workers Directive prove that neither the Leave nor Remain establishment offers a real solution for the working class, pointing instead to the cross-border solidarity we saw at the Lindsay Oil Refinery. And finally, we explored their ultimate mandate, abandoning the compromised establishment entirely to build a new international mass workers' party driven by a generation locked out of the economy.
Yeah.
The core takeaway from this publication is uncompromising. Attempting to gently steer a capitalist system designed to extract wealth will always fail. They believe only coordinated, independent international action by the working class can actually rewrite the economic rules.
And that leaves you with a final thought to mull over, one that extends beyond the immediate arguments of the source material. The publication argues passionately that the working class needs its own independent political party to fight global capitalism. But imagine they actually succeed.
Okay.
If a new mass workers' party were to win power in the UK tomorrow, how would they navigate a global economy that remains entirely dominated by the very capitalist institutions, the international bond markets, the global trade blocs, the multinational corporations that they seek to dismantle?
That's a huge problem.
It is. Can a socialist project truly survive and provide for its citizens in just one country? Or does the entire global board have to flip simultaneously for their vision to become a reality?
It is a monumental question, and it's exactly the kind of structural puzzle you should keep exploring on your own. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into a very distinct, fiercely argued political perspective. We hope it helped you understand the mechanics and the arguments shaping the side of the political spectrum. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep looking at how the rules are actually written, and we'll see you next time.